You're listening to LVB Podcast Show with your friend, advocate, and host, Alvaro.
Hi and welcome to LVB Show. My name is Alvaro and I'm very happy to be with you today. Before I introduce our guest, I want to say thank you for people listening from the United States, from Canada, from Africa, from Europe, from Asia, from Latin America. And also, I want to mention that we are now on Spotify, which is exciting. And in the near future, and I knock on wood, we're going to be on Apple Podcast, of course. So it's pretty exciting to expand the reach of our show. Okay, so today we have Gary Bartos from Echobatix. He's going to pronounce it better than me because it's his company. But the point of this interview is technology. He has very exciting things to tell our listeners. So, Gary, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. You pronounced everything correctly, and I hope I can live up to that wonderful introduction.
My pleasure. And okay, the first question definitely is, why did you build this company and what it's all about?
Yeah, so I've worked in image processing. So using cameras, taking the pictures and processing them with computers for my entire career, over 25 years now. And instead of developing products like machines that go into factories to build cars and stuff like that, I wanted to develop things directly for people. So that's the main story. But behind that, the way it started getting into assistive tech was that when I lived in Austin, Texas, about 15 years ago, I gave a very small donation to help fund a captioning system in a movie theater. And this is for the hearing impaired, hard of hearing people who are deaf.
Right.
And it was such a cool system. It was so elegant that I was shocked. I just hadn't experienced anything like this before. And as it happens by chance, I met one of the inventors just 2 years ago through a mutual friend who didn't even know about this connection.
Oh, wow.
And it's Larry Goldberg of Verizon, who's a name in assistive tech. So anyway, so that had to do with assistive tech for hearing, but because of my background, image processing and my own vision, over years, it dawned on me that I really should get into assistive tech for people with visual disabilities. And the other thing I'll mention is, so I have strabismus. So one of my eyes points out away from the other, and which is also common to a number of people who have other disabilities with their vision. Any number of conditions can be paired with that. For me, it's pretty much just the strabismus. So, and this will be familiar, I think, to a lot of people. So I grew up, I saw differently than most other people. I look different because my eye turns out, and there were things that I couldn't do that my friends could do. So by legal definitions, medical definitions, I'm not disabled, but in some contexts, there are things I can't see and I can't do, like playing sports, trying to do things that require a good depth perception. So it's not like having low vision. It's not like being legally blind, but it's a taste of it, if that makes sense.
It does. Very interesting, Gary. Thank you for sharing that personal side of you.
Sure.
Okay, so now you are developing an application for iOS. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so it's in beta right now in test flight, and it's called Point and Speak, which I hope explains, what you do with it. So this is for touchscreen accessibility. So, and as touchscreens, I mean basically any flat, physically featureless control panel, like on most microwaves, ovens, ultimately kiosks are the big one. So,
Oh,
yeah.
so okay, so let me
Go ahead.
kiosks. Yeah. Okay, I have a question. A
Yep.
question that I didn't prepare, I have to say for our listeners. I love to do that. I mean, I like to
Yeah,
be
yeah,
spontaneous about that, and people like that, you know?
sure. Yeah,
So
yeah.
because I get excited about what I do, you know.
Right.
If we are maybe using um one of those machines on, you know, when you go to a bank and you have
Yep.
those machines, would it work something like this?
Yes. So the idea is there are, let's say, three pieces to it.
Okay.
So the first is, you have OCR, optical character recognition,
Right.
which we're all familiar with by now because,
Yes.
it'll run on our phones, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay, but it's lacking something. So you point your camera at something, it'll read the text,
Right.
but where is that text? How do you, if the text is on a button, how do you get to that button?
That's a wonderful
Right.
question.
Yeah. So what you need there is something that's only become available very recently on phones and other devices, which is detecting your hand. So if you can detect someone's hand, which in itself doesn't always work, with a lot of mobile devices, but it works okay. And we're assuming for the moment that a person who is low vision or legally blind is going to be able to point their phone enough to keep their hand in view. That's a whole nother question. But if we can figure out where someone's hand is and where their finger is pointing, the finger they're going to press on a button,
Right.
and somehow we either ask them to have their finger underneath the button, which is a little unnatural, but then we're saying, hey, read this button, tell me what this button is. Or if it's a completely flat surface, we tell them where to move their finger, or we tell them when their finger's in the right place. So we say, press the button now.
Oh wow.
That's
very good
what we've got.
technology, I have to say, you know?
Well, thank you. And what in the beta app, what I have right now is, you move your finger around and it's going to read what's above your finger only.
Okay.
But the very first version we were testing, we used a paper target that it looks like part of a microwave.
Okay.
And so I'd mail it out to people, and I included like a Braille reference.
Okay.
To make sure Braille readers would know it's like, okay, you're going to point it this way and this is what's on the target and everything.
Right.
And then when your finger's on top of one of these fake buttons, it would tell you where your finger was. That's the way we intend it to work. So the idea is to merge that early testing with what's working now, which is just read what's above my finger, get it running faster, make improvements, and then do a public release.
Wow, how exciting.
I do want to get, I hope so. Yeah. And so right now that's what we're shooting for. We want to keep it as simple as possible. You move your finger around, it tells you what's there. And that is, as far as that part of the technology is going to go, hand detection plus OCR. That's not everything, but the human brain is the much, much, much smarter thing that then figures out, I know what I want to do. And
right.
So that's where, it's literally just presenting information to somebody. It's just a tool, and then they decide what they want to do.
So Gary, I have another question.
Sure.
For those people listening from outside the United States or maybe Canada or maybe the UK who are more familiar with kiosks, can you tell our listeners what kind of kiosks exist in the United States, for instance? What could be this applied to?
Yes, certainly. So with kiosks in the US, which you make a very good point, there are many countries in the world that have used them a lot more than we do. You have things like nowadays restaurant menus. That's a somewhat less obvious one. There are these touch screen restaurant menus, or you go into a cafe and you want a coffee,
right? And
it's just a touch screen. It's just a flat thing,
right?
And it's just a whole bunch of buttons. And the instant you touch it, it's not even you slide your finger on. The instant you touch it, you just ordered, I don't know, lemonade instead of coffee.
Wow.
Yeah. So how do you even, so there's another thing. How do you even move your hand around? Even if someone was telling you move your hand around, how do you move it around so that you're not touching the screen, but you only reach down to touch it when you need to. And that's
Right.
so restaurant menus, airport kiosks. Sometimes you go into an office building and they want you to check in and they want you to use a touch screen. They're just more and more and more of these things all over the place.
Wow, how
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Restaurant
Oh.
menus being another big one. McDonald's has them. They're trying to make some of them accessible, but
Right.
the majority are not.
Okay, so it's getting more exciting. Okay, so people may be asking, okay, this sounds great. When is going to be released and how much is going to cost?
Okay, so my plan is to release publicly this summer, and it's still going to be simple. So I'm probably not going to be running around saying, hey, everybody try this. Well, you want to get a lot of people to try it because we're just going to keep improving.
Right.
So, I'm hoping there's one major development push. There's one thing I want to improve before we release it. I mean, it works now, but
Right.
there's one piece that our testers said, hey, this is the main thing that if you were to fix anything, fix this.
Okay.
I was like, okay, so we're fixing that. I don't want to
Okay.
mention what it is.
Okay.
But the plan is this summer 22.
How much is going to cost, you think?
Okay, so here is where I say I would love more feedback on this because I haven't settled on something because
All right.
there are three ways of thinking about it, and I want to be this I want to be very open about because assistive technology on average is way too expensive.
Right.
And I think it's not just too expensive from the perspective of the user. I just don't understand from the engineering side the justification of the cost. I just think there's a story that people are told again and again, like, we're making this for so few people. We have to get our R&D money. Okay, so you've heard this. We have to get our R&D money back.
Oh, yeah.
That's why, this should cost $500, but sorry, we have to charge you $6,000.
I know. I have heard that a lot.
I won't name names, but yeah,
No, no.
exactly. Okay, so what if we started with the idea that it cannot be expensive because it should not be expensive? Then how do we approach it? And so I think there are a couple options there. One is we could make it free, but we do need to pay for it some other way,
Yeah.
or maybe there's some like add-on features that someone could pay for if they want to. So that's one option. And I'm sure most people say, yes, make it free. Well, development, I got to hire people for some of these features.
Sure.
So development costs money. So somewhere, either I've got to charge people or I've got to get grant money, which, can happen,
Yes.
or some other way to make money, but free is a possibility. So that'd be nice. The other option is a one-time cost, like people pay X number of dollars, they get the app,
Oh, yeah.
and then they get some updates,
Yeah.
So I know some people who have done that. Anyone who uses OCR apps that they
yeah.
bought, like say with the past couple of years, like voice stream
Yeah.
scanner.
Yeah.
I know Winston, he's local. I've talked to him. And so he's the head of voice stream and
Yeah.
he charges a fixed price.
Yeah.
And other people like SuperSense, also local, they charge a monthly rate, or you pay like a pretty high cost,
Yeah.
but you get it forever.
Yes.
So those are possibilities, different kinds of one-time cost. And the last one, which is the way my advisors and my team and I have leaned, is a low monthly cost with what we'll say is, hey, you're going to be getting not just like bug fixes, but here's what we're going to be doing. We're going to release this, then we're going to add this feature. Like, it's going to remember things that you visited, so it's going to be easier to use those. Or what I really would like to implement is, hey, what if you could practice using an interface at home? Wouldn't that be kind of cool, right? You could,
Right.
before you even go and use this thing, like at a restaurant, you would actually be able to practice the whole layout. You'd actually know it better than pretty much anyone going and visiting, because you'd know it in advance.
Oh,
So
very, very interesting. And
yeah,
that is using artificial intelligence?
there's some of that I'm trying to use as little as possible.
Why?
So AI, like machine learning,
Yeah.
It only works so well. It's really good for certain things. Like if we have no idea how to answer a question, and if artificial intelligence, machine learning will give us the right answer 50% of the time, 60% of the time, 80% of the time, that may be amazing.
Sure.
But let's take another view. It's like, what if we're talking about something really important, and someone has to get this they want to do something accurately, and they want to do it quickly. 50% accuracy doesn't sound very good then. And I make the analogy, let's say someone's making your computer, and do you want to just be, let's say, 80% sure that your computer is going to work?
No.
Or do you want to be 99% sure?
99.
There you go. So sometimes machine learning, artificial intelligence are enough because they can do things that are very hard to do otherwise. Other times it's terrible. You have to find some other way to do it. So, for OCR, that uses machine learning. Hand detection also uses machine learning, and it's newer, so it doesn't work quite as well. But as much as possible of everything else, we're trying to make it very straightforward. Like, here comes an image, here comes some data, therefore it does this. Here comes some different data, therefore it does another very predictable thing. And if it can't do what it's supposed to do, it'll announce, I can't do this. Make it very clear that it's not going to guess and hopefully get it wrong, which certainly happens. But that's the mindset, is we try to make it as accurate and robust as we can.
Gary, our listeners are thinking, okay, this is wonderful, but can we hear it in action, maybe like a little demonstration for our listeners?
Sure.
Great.
Let's try.
Let's try.
And hopefully, so I'm talking on a headset, and hopefully you'll be able to hear my phone through the headset.
Okay, I'll let you know.
Could you hear that?
A little bit, if you can put it a little bit louder.
I'll try to, I've got it cranked up. This is let's see, I think it's the maximum. I'll try to get my phone as close to the microphone.
Okay, that's better, yes.
Okay. So let's see. 3. Just a moment, that was 3. All right, here, let's get a different number. 8. Okay, so it said 3, 2, 8.
Yes.
I don't know if you heard that.
Where are you pointing the iPhone to?
Okay, so what I'm pointing at is, I have on my desk, I have just a paper mock-up of a number pad, like you'd find on a microwave. So I'm just pointing at the individual numbers. So when it says 3, I'm pointing at the number 3. Or it says 2. So it's just like I said, it's OCR, but where it's reading is right at the end of my index finger.
So it's working. It's working.
Yeah.
Well,
it's working.
Yeah.
Even though I'm holding the phone, like I'm holding it like right up close to my face.
With right.
So, and I'm sighted. So in this case, I can adjust how I'm holding the phone relatively easily.
You have a point. We need to figure out, adjust how we're going to do that. With one hand, you hold the iPhone, you have to put the camera facing where your finger in your other hand is. You got to do that. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yes. And so, I have a team that I work with, advisors, and half of them are blind.
Oh, great.
And all except one are totally blind. It's just the way it worked out. So their experience is, understandably, if someone is low vision or is legally blind, but they have, more than light perception, then they have an easier time. People with at least, some usable vision, they have an easier time pointing the phone and holding their hand, because they can actually check, this, I can see where my hand is. Maybe they can even see their hand in the picture, depending how big their phone is. If someone's totally blind, this isn't true of all, but it's generally harder for someone who's totally blind to point the phone and have an idea, hey, is my hand in view or not? So, it does announce, hand not yet detected, hand not straight enough, hand in view. It does tell you your hand is in view, or it's not, it's straight enough. But it all comes back to this thing, is like, hey, this will be free or cheap. That much we've established. But is there some way we can eliminate this thing that is holding the phone, having to hold it at all. Because, why now you're using one hand to hold the phone and the other to point.
Yeah.
It's mobile, but there is an answer to this, or an answer in development to that problem.
There is an answer to that. Can you tell me the answer, or we have to wait?
The answer is smart glasses.
Okay, we'll go into that because it's super powerful. We're going to go now into that.
Yeah.
So Gary, I'm excited. Can you try, like, I don't know, like maybe if you hold a book, or maybe a medicine kind of product, or maybe a cereal. I don't know what, any product. I don't know.
Let me see.
This is getting exciting. Very exciting.
Yes.
Oh, I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Do you think it would be possible? Oh my God. Now I'm getting even more excited for our listeners.
Yeah.
And it's because if we go grocery shopping,
yeah,
do you think we'll be able to touch with our fingers the price tag, point there, and maybe able to announce the price?
Maybe.
No, I'm not saying is made for that use, but I'm not saying.
Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah, it's one of these things. If someone wanted to try that, man, I'd certainly like that. There are some considerations there.
Okay.
Which is that, so we have price tags. They can be on flat things, like like a box of frozen fish sticks or something.
Right.
It could be on a bag that's just very crinkly. The price tag could be
the bag
partly
is more
missing.
complicated, right?
Yeah, it's a lot more complicated, which is one of the reasons, if we can get a reasonable solution for flat surfaces, and you need to know where to put your finger, okay, that's something we can do. When we get to things that are harder to read, there's OCR that can do that reasonably well. And the question is, does it run on our phones, or do you have to basically send it to Google or Microsoft online and wait for it to process the image? Because then you have a lot more processing power, which is something we're exploring a little bit. But I want to keep as much as possible on the phone. So you lose your Wi-Fi signal, you lose your cell signal, it does happen, and your app still works. Wouldn't that be nice?
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, exciting. Yeah, if you can try other things, yeah.
Proportion is near 100%. Every hit case is probably 70%. The total for this test, since it relies to an internal check that continues BLE surfaces in us. If the algorithm accepts Unix, allows it to fuse such 25319.
Algorithm.
Okay, so that was reading from a book called Vision, which is one of the first books in my field. Automated image processing by an author who worked here in Boston at MIT, David Marr. So I just picked a random thing, and then you hear a whole bunch of numbers and a whole bunch of stuff. So that was just reading from a book. So yeah, it just reads text to point at. Yeah.
Nice.
Preferably not too much. We want to read just what's at the tip of your finger. Otherwise, it will read the entire page just like a regular OCR program, which we don't want in this case.
No, I understand what you're saying. Now I'm thinking about something else. You see how I think fast for my listeners? That's what I love about doing this, that you get a lot of questions in your head. Let's imagine we need to sign a document.
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken, this would help us, because there is a place where it says signature. And so if you are able to find that, then you're able to see that below you need to sign, or above you need to sign. I'm just saying, I know it's not made for that, but I'm just saying,
that's a good question.
It's exciting to see those possibilities in the future. Maybe, you never know.
Well, this is exactly why it's great to have these conversations, because I think we can imagine, I'm going to digress a little bit here.
Okay.
I think it's very easy for people to imagine two ways that companies try to develop technology. One is they come up with an idea and the engineers think, this is great.
Yes.
I'm going to spend a year, 5 years working on this.
Yes.
And when I'm done.
Yes.
So I don't like that. So the other way is you talk to as many people as you can at the beginning, in the middle of the beginning, at the end of every single step, preferably every week or two, and you're constantly just talking. You're asking questions. Maybe it's in the middle of a conversation. It's a friend and you're just talking about something else and then this comes up. Or, you're talking to someone new, like we're talking. And all these opportunities to say, hey, this is where we are right now. Does this make sense? Is there something else that would be useful? So to get to your point, signatures, I think, yes, it could work. I think with signatures, because signature sheets, sometimes it says signature, sometimes it doesn't.
Okay.
Sometimes it's at the bottom. Sometimes it's looking for initials. It's different enough that this could be, I would hate to make it another app because there are already so many apps. But I think it might be a special feature that someone would turn on because we'd want it to be working in a very specific mode. You're signing something, so we don't have to do a bunch of other stuff. We just want to say, hey, figure out where I need to sign. And maybe it could go into a different mode that is specific to finding the place where you're going to sign and then letting you know when your finger is in that place. And that's a very specific use.
Right. Let me tell you a specific use for this. When I travel to the United States for our listeners, I have to fill out a very long form saying, first of all, I'm not going to kill any American because they ask you that.
Sure.
They ask you that.
Yeah, preferably not.
It's going to be good.
Yeah.
And they say things like, if you're a terrorist and things like that. I think common sense should apply to that for our listeners. But anyways, what happens is I always depend on the help of anyone on the plane.
Right.
Would it be something else to be able to fill out that information? You have the question, and below you have to write the answer, etc. So you would understand where do you need to start writing. And for our listeners,
right.
For me, as I used to have a decent eyesight, I know how to write using a pen. So you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. So just thinking out loud, here's how I would tackle that particular use. Is one, I would want to be able to recognize with whatever's the app that this is a form. And there are things that will do that. I don't know if they run on iPhone or Android yet, but there are things that are online. So if you had access online, say on the plane, which can happen, they'll have Wi-Fi these days. Okay, so then this becomes a possibility. And so Google has something called Google Vision API, where you can send them an image and say, this is what I want to know. And this costs a very tiny amount of money, but it's certainly possible. And by tiny, I mean like $1.50 for 1,000 images. So pretty small. I know it's something I'm looking into as sort of a backup.
Right.
But you could submit the image, and when you submit it to someone like Google, and the others would have something similar, other big companies, then there are all sorts of things you can do, including say, hey, tell me just what's in this image. And there are techniques, I've not explored this particular one online for this use case, but there are techniques where you can identify, hey, that looks like a form. And this is where I think the outlines of the form are. And it might be able to say, that's a form. And once the software knows it's a form, again, it could operate in a different mode.
Right.
Where I see difficulty, it's like one, it could, let's say, read the entire form and maybe even just read it out loud. So at least everything it's going to ask you. And then the next question is, okay, how do you fill out each line?
Right.
That's where you get into where's my finger on the form. But the difficulty I see is that some forms, I filled out forms, same thing, on the plane, leaving the United States, coming back. They're small. They have, sometimes you answer it'll ask the question, and sometimes you answer the question to the right. And sometimes there's a line below the question. So
you have a point. Yeah, it's not so black and white. I do understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But for our listeners, we'll get there. We're gonna
Yeah.
get there eventually, you know?
Yes,
And that's gonna help a lot.
yes, as long as we focus on making this a priority and any such feature is accessible at the very beginning, not they develop it for people. Let's say someone's coming to this country, they don't speak English and they need help with a form, and there's no one on the plane who speaks the language. It's like, that's probably going to happen first.
Right.
Unless we say, okay, if you're doing it for someone who speaks another language, can you do it for someone who speaks English, but they can't read the form because it's this tiny little printed thing? I think those things should happen at the same time, at the very beginning. Build the accessibility in from the beginning, not just somewhere at the end, but build it in from the beginning.
Okay, I have another question. Let's say I buy a radio device.
Yeah.
And this radio device has not a touch screen, but has a screen.
Yes.
Also would help me a lot, right? Because in those cases, you have a small screen, there's only one line of text
Yes.
that goes there. So if you put your finger above or below that text, it may work, right? It may tell you something.
I think so. Yeah. As long as the text is big enough in the image that it can read it. So that means, like, for small text, you actually need to get closer. For big text, you can read it, farther away. So for other devices, for example, someone actually tested the beta app, a student, someone I've never met, and she tested it on, I think it was her dryer. And, and so the dryer just has text printed on it, and it could be like our dryer here at home. It's actually got a circular, knob that you twist, and the text is printed around the knob in a circle.
Oh, that's a tricky one, huh?
Yeah, that is. Yeah, exactly. And she discovered a feature that she didn't even know existed because she used this beta app. So it's not just OCR, it's there, but she was moving her finger around and she discovered it. So I think the same thing would apply, is as long as the app is saying fast enough, like you don't have to move your finger somewhere and wait and wait. As long as it's fast enough. So
it has to be fast enough. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. It's like using it for people who use a white cane. Imagine if you put your white cane out front and you had to wait a second to say, oh, I'm changing from like carpeting to linoleum floor.
You're absolutely right. Speed is absolutely super important. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Oh, but that's another moment where you can use it, and is when you go, you go to, for instance, these places you go to washing you need to wash your clothing, and you don't know how to use the machine.
Oh boy,
because there's a lot of text in there and you are alone. So how am I gonna do this?
So
oh my God, there's a lot.
Yes, and it ties in together with other things that we want to develop later, because we're focusing on mostly things that people do indoors, accessibility indoors for the most part.
Yeah.
So that includes text accessibility, which we know is a big problem. And it'll get into things related to indoor navigation. So this is kind of a combination. So if someone goes into a laundromat that's open to the public, it's pay machines, and they want to wash their clothes. They bring in their coins, they got everything they need, they bring their clothes. Okay. When someone is approaching a laundromat, then if we access publicly available maps in most countries these days, at least in major cities,
right,
we're going to be able to figure out, hey, you're getting close to a laundromat, or if you even said, hey, I'm in the laundromat.
Right.
And in that case, what we can do is say, okay, it's not exactly a different mode as such, kind of, but we can say, okay, you're going to a laundromat. Therefore, here are the things that someone wants to do in a laundromat. And again, we don't need artificial intelligence. We can just sit there and say, well, I want to wash my clothes. I want to dry my clothes.
Right.
Here's the language of the laundromat that I want to use. Is it English? Is it Spanish? Is it Russian? Is it Mandarin Chinese? Whatever. Okay, here are the words or phrases that are related to machines, washing machines, dryers in that language. Maybe even specific to certain countries, they may use slightly different words. Especially true of Spanish,
Right.
and Chinese, and so on. Is like there are different dialects, there are different words that pop. So let's say we know, hey, you're in this country, you're using laundromat, you go in, we've preloaded these words. So even if you move your finger around, however that works, we know in advance what we're looking for.
Like from a database or something, right?
Yeah,
that
exactly.
You have included. Oh,
yes. And if
that
you're the
would be
first
very
person,
very intelligent.
yeah, I would think so.
I like that idea a lot.
I think it could really be helpful. And this is where we, without having to store someone's private info or deal with that at all, someone using the app could help other people. If let's say it's the first person to use a laundromat in France, okay, and or Algiers, some other country where French is spoken, and let's say like I don't know how to speak French, I can recognize a few words,
right?
And so, oh hey, it can read this. It wasn't necessarily set up for French, but it's reading French words because someone else was there before me, and it saved whatever they read. It uploaded it, preferably anonymously, and now one person, 2 people, 10 people have used this, and we start to build up this database, a pretty good representation of these are the words you would expect in this place. And then it could even be specific to, maybe I'm going really far ahead here, and boy, I would need a lot of engineers to do this, but you can imagine when you get to very specific places and you say this is a geographic location, and oh hey, there's a washer and a dryer, there's I don't know, there's a Coke machine there, right. They're all over the place. There's a pay phone and it has a touch screen, or needs a card or something like that. Right. And there's this other device, and there's this other device, and all of those things are in here. That's just a couple words we need to store related to a location. So that's another way where, the basic functionality is just read what's at the end of my finger. But if we can make it a bit smarter over time, then I think it would be more useful. And I would think people would like that.
Wow. Yes. I'm really fascinated by this technology, what it's going to do. Everything is a process for our listeners, but the potential is very important for us. And now, if you can tell us a little bit about your plans for the smart glasses, with the touch screen, whatever you are doing with that.
Yes. So we mentioned smart glasses before. So,
right.
So with the app running on a phone, like we said before, I mean, there's, and you picked right up on it, is you're holding the phone with one hand and you're pointing with the other hand. Both your hands are occupied. So right. What would be really nice is, what if your hands weren't occupied? Maybe you've got a cane, a dog, you're holding a wheelchair with one hand, you're using a walker, a support cane, or you just want to hold a cup of coffee in one hand, or you just want to have a free hand. So, smart glasses are a way around this. And so if you're wearing the camera or cameras, and you could just move your hand out there in space and you're interacting with something in the world, that's a way to get around this problem. Now we're not as concerned about holding a phone. That just goes away. We just need to have our body pointed in the right direction,
right?
Generally. So now we're going to be using devices in the same way that sighted people, for whom, let's admit it, these devices were designed,
of course,
often kind of thoughtlessly. It was designed for sighted people to face them in a certain way, and and so on and so forth. If they're angled for someone of a certain height who's sighted. So if someone's wearing smart glasses, and if we're running hand detection and OCR and the rest of it, then effectively we can present information to that person in the same way that it's presented by the machine to a sighted person. And so what we're doing is, we have been awarded a grant from Snap Incorporated, the company that makes Snapchat, social media app,
right,
to develop this technology, to within the limits of what's possible these days on smart glasses that they have made available for people who do R&D, but they're not currently commercially available. So it's to create the technology up to, a point. And what we want to do is we're going to demonstrate that, oh, hey, this is what it would be like to take this app, run it on these smart glasses. And, with this, what we hope is, so people here in Boston will get to try this, some number of people. And then what we hope is from this, we get a good idea is like, okay, now that we're really trying this, we want the same thing from the people who test it. Okay, how does it need to improve? What could make it better? Because smart glasses are coming.
Yes.
That would be available. The question is, what capabilities do they need to really be worth buying? And how much are they going to cost? And even when someone buys it, is it going to have enough usefulness to be worth buying, or do you just wait? So we want to do as much of the engineering as we can now, so that we don't all have to be sitting there for years waiting for smart glasses to come out. And then we come out, it's another few years before they have proper accessibility.
Wow, that's exciting. As you are talking, I'm imagining things, because I think the future of technology is incredible, and the future is now. Actually,
yes.
You say the future, but give us 2, 3, 5 years, and it's incredible what is coming our way.
Yeah.
I guess you envision that smart glasses are going to have like an app store full of applications that work with it, right?
Yes, exactly.
Oh, exciting.
Yes, because I'll say this, we don't have to invent that, because Snap already has. So even though these smart glasses that we're using now, the particular model is not commercially available. They work the way Snapchat works. The way Snapchat works is you can load essentially different apps inside of Snapchat, and you can use your finger to scroll through them and then load them and then run them. So for people using Snapchat, this is mostly taking video and making it look like someone's wearing a funny hat, or turning their face into that of a cat or something like that. It's a bunch of these visual effects.
Right.
But all that same capability to pick something like, hey, I want this effect or this app, is built into their smart glasses. So they're already, you can see why we're so excited to work with them. Yeah. They already have so much of the technology there. That's just part of their business. Everyone else is going to have to build it up. Apple is close because they have the App Store. So, supporting another device, iPhone, iPad, and then now whatever they're going to call I dare say eyeglasses or whatever. And then of course, Google will have to call theirs something else. But same thing, it's, Google Play for Android and for Android devices. Right. So other companies are going to have something. Snap has just tied everything together already.
And Gary, how long are we talking until those are released?
Well, so this is an it depends question. So or answer. It depends on how long people are willing to wait to get what they think is worth the money. So
that's a great answer, my friend. I totally agree with you. Yes.
Yeah. Like the first version of iPhone, there weren't apps. You could just visit stuff online. You'd use the browser, you go online, right? But for a lot of people, myself included, it was still worth getting that iPhone. Oh, yes. My wife convinced me, wait half a year, it'll be cheaper. It was half the price. That was well worth it. So there's an example. And then, the history, some years later, the iPhone became properly accessible to some degree, and still, adding accessibility, but same thing is going to happen with smart glasses. So we're at the very, very, very beginning of real smart glasses. So
true.
Initially, it could be that smart glasses are going to be purchased mostly by people who have a lot of money to spend, which is not a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And then the next generation, okay, now it's more affordable to people who are, just really enthusiastic about technology and they're willing to spend this money on this stuff instead of getting a new phone, and then so on and so forth. And over time, the capabilities get better. So if someone wanted just to try smart glasses and see what can this do for me as assistive technology, well, you have Be My Eyes, you have Envision. There are a couple options now, not Be My Eyes on smart glasses, but there are a couple options to figure out what can cameras do for assistive technology. But if you want smart glasses that you can try, that'll do things like some kind of navigation, some kind of touchscreen accessibility. Well, the beginning is right now you contact us, and if you live in Boston or close by, then we just drive over, we visit you, and you try them out. But then the next step is, okay, somebody somewhere makes them available for purchase, and then some small number of people may get them, or maybe we can get a grant. I'm just throwing ideas out there, and we can supply them to a certain number of people, which is really, it's a combination. They're using them, but they're also kind of testing them.
Right.
But let's say 5 years from now, I think there's a very good chance that they're going to be commercially available glasses that are the same cost or lower cost than the cost of a new smartphone. Maybe the smartphone does the processing that these things can't do everything. Maybe they're not as fast as people would like, but they'll be able to do something useful. And then the question is, do they do something useful enough? If you want to wait till quote unquote everyone has them and all the features are there, yeah, it could be closer to 10 years, but I think it's less time. It all depends on how excited is someone, how much they want to spend, and do they need just a few features. And the last thing I'll add in, and have they been talking to us and saying, hey, this is what we really want, can you develop it? And then I go around and try to find a way to raise money, and then we try to develop it.
Right. Something else that comes to mind using your technology is when you go to the subway, for instance, in New York City, and you have a map in front of you.
Yes.
And if you point your finger to a specific area, and it may be able to say Brooklyn, a number 3 line, blah, 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 blah. That, again, this is not the way it was designed to, maybe, but maybe it will help someone in the future for something like that.
Maybe, yeah. This one I'm less confident of, because what we would really like to have is 2 technologies. One to do the point and speak part. So that one, that's in development, that's coming. The second one is interpreting maps like what we find in subways, which New York, in this country, it's really 4 different places. And then if you include San Francisco, above ground places, San Francisco, Chicago, other major cities. But when it's these complicated maps we have it in Boston too. So Washington, DC, Boston, Baltimore, and New York City are the subway cities in this country. Not many. So you have these maps, the subways go all over the place, and you have to interpret the map. So they're these line drawings, right? And on these drawings, there are the different stations and so on. So yeah, so it's, that's the sort of thing where I'd say, we're going to develop the technology to do the reading, and we're going to try to work with someone else who wants to do the map reading, because we don't want to have a company that's focusing on these 2 very different things. But we'd be happy to work with someone else.
Right.
Who says, we're going to focus on maps. Is like, you're the kind of company we'd want to work with. Not someone who's going to try to do everything, but just another company trying to focus. I would love to see lots of that in assistive tech, is 2 companies, they each have a focus, they each have their own thing. And then they decide to work together in a way that really no single company could.
Yes, that's the way. Yeah, I think that way. Sometimes I do, and I have done many technology related interviews, and sometimes the people I interview say, oh, that would be good, but I'm not sure. So what you're saying is absolutely right. Nobody's going to do it all. It's impossible. And we have to do alliances and work together, and that's how the world goes better, I think. So
yes.
Do you have, before we go to the next point, and it's something I'm super excited about, and if GPS, I love that one. Yeah. Any other thought on the smart glasses with your technology, or we are done with that?
With smart glasses, I guess there are maybe 2 more thoughts. One is, maybe contrary to belief, among a lot of sighted people, not everyone who is low vision or legally blind wears glasses or or sunglasses.
True.
So one of my advisors, someone I'd be talking to in about half an hour or so, she does not wear sunglasses, never has. She's totally blind. It's just not her thing. So whereas another advisor, a mutual friend, he's worn sunglasses since he was a child. So there is the, I don't know if it's a concern exactly that if someone's going to wear smart glasses, for some people, this is going to be new. And it's, is wearing smart glasses going to call attention to them that they don't necessarily want? They just want to go about their day and do what they want and not wear something that's, very obviously this, hey, look at me, I'm wearing assistive technology stuff.
Yeah.
So another thing that we really would like, and, if we're not developing the hardware, we have less control over this, but I think market pressure is going to force this, is the technology really needs to look good. My preference is that with any assistive technology, it looks so good and it works so well that sighted people will be jealous, and maybe one day they get it, but they got to wait. So I just think that's funny. But I think it's also the right way to think about it. Right. And the other thing is, so with smart glasses, now we have another device. There are things like there's battery life that's important. Yes. Yes, you can plug smart glasses into a phone backup battery. Right. And then they can run for a long time. Yeah. That may be acceptable to some people, but we want to tackle can we get it to work at all problem first, as smart glasses are being developed and more companies are working on it, and they're aware of these things like battery life and how much power it takes to do certain things. So I would say that's the other one is, and people raise this issue, battery life of smart glasses. Yes, it's short right now, and there are workarounds. Are people okay with those workarounds? The people who want to try it really badly will be okay. And the people who are not, well, they're going to wait long enough. By the time they wait, the smart glasses will be better anyway. So I think these are solvable problems. It's same thing with phones. I mean, the batteries are much better than they used to be. They're more powerful, and yet they run longer. So I think it's just a matter of time.
Now, thinking out loud, maybe the smart glasses will be charged from the sunlight in the future.
That.
Yeah, you never know.
Yeah.
All right. This is just futuristic stuff for our listeners to enjoy. And it's coming. It's coming.
Yeah.
Okay. So GPS. I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Before going into the indoor navigation field, which is very, very exciting, I want to touch something on the outdoors navigation, and is everybody that I talk to and companies I have been talking to say we need to make it precise. In other words, when you go from point A to point B, the person has to go exactly to the door he or she wants to, and the device has to say you have arrived to your destination when you have truly arrived to your destination.
Yes.
And they are trying to make that happen. They are telling me artificial intelligence, LiDAR technology, computer vision, sometimes Bluetooth technology, sometimes beacons, etc., will help us get there. Yeah. What are your thoughts about it, Gary, and how far we are from that?
Yeah, so I'm, in what I hope is a good way, I'm a bit of a contrarian about the proper solution for this problem.
Interesting.
Because, and I'll say why. So it's just like the other things. I like to think from the very beginning, how does this need to work so it's not a pain, so it works even when, let's say, beacons aren't there. That's another whole story. At a beacon side, beacons may work in certain areas, but there have been a lot of failures using beacons because you have to install them, you have to maintain them, and not even talking about, it doesn't even matter accuracy. A beacon doesn't tell you that, for example, the door you really want is a bit to the left. There's a whole bunch of other technology that's needed there. All beacons can help you do is tell you roughly where you are, assuming the beacons are updated and so on, which has been a problem in every installation that people have talked to me about. Even people who have tested them said, yeah, we dropped this because the beacons didn't work through certain kinds of walls, or they weren't maintained, or the beacon was mounted to a wall in a museum and it fell. They're just, it's very hard to imagine that. Let's look at how many decades it took to install ramps where we needed them, and that's still not even remotely done.
Right.
Now imagine the tens and tens of thousands just of government buildings in any country. In this country, I've forgotten if the number is 50,000. That's on the low end. It might be 150,000. Anything that qualifies as a government building. Let's assume they get beacons first. I'm sure a lot of companies would be excited to install tens of thousands of sites.
Right.
I don't think it's ever going to happen because of these other problems. Is you just can't get over the fact that someone needs to maintain them. Anything goes wrong, it's a problem. It would take years and years and years, and by the time they install them, well, I think there's a better approach anyways. So I don't think beacons are the answer. I'm not saying they won't be installed somewhere, and I'm not saying they can't be useful in certain places.
Right.
I think it's just only going to work in very specific locations. And people I know who have worked with beacons specifically to try to set them up even say, yeah, that's the dead end. People can, argue with me about that. I'd be happy to, or I should say, discuss it. So GPS, precise GPS. I'm going to just say no. I don't think it's going to get much better than it is now because it's already arguably better than it has a right to be. So here's the problem. And it's not even, it's like, imagine GPS is accurate to a centimeter.
Yes.
Wouldn't that be awesome? Okay.
Yes.
You're in New York. You're in Paris. You're in Jakarta. You're in Hong Kong. You're in Moscow. And the instant you step between two tall buildings, whoosh, GPS is gone. And surprise, the one place where you need navigation the most is where there are these tall buildings where you can't tell where the door is. And even when you get in the door, that's a whole other thing, is like, where do I go? It's this huge building and GPS fails you. So GPS can't be the answer. Not the complete answer. Even in Boston. Yeah. Boston's not a big city. It's not nearly as big as New York. It doesn't have as nearly as many tall buildings, but the street where there are law offices and where there are a bunch of businesses right downtown, you walk in that and boom, like me, you lose GPS, and I'm sighted. I lose GPS and I was trying to find a building and I couldn't tell where it was and I couldn't tell what door to go into. And I was half an hour late for my appointment because of that. So, so this is, I think, that's my story. One of the many reasons that GPS won't get there. And I don't think we should rely on it. I don't think, I honestly don't think it's worth the development effort. For what it is so good already. We can get, not always, but often within a meter or two or three in a relatively open area. Who would have dreamt of this, decades ago? I wasn't thinking of this when I was growing up. So
that's true.
There's that. So I do think other technologies are necessary because they're a better fit. So as long as we know, hey, you're pretty close to this building, then this is where other technologies take over. And I think they have to, because there are other things that arise. Like, okay, now you're not necessarily on a sidewalk anymore. You're not in your Uber or your taxi or the bus. You're now approaching a building. It could be a big, well-maintained building. It could be a building where there's, I don't know, a problem. There's someone left something on the steps, which,
right.
Yeah, you might detect that just fine with your cane. What if someone's walking without a cane? We don't want to have someone cycling through 5 or 6 or 12 different sensors and apps and things to say, okay, are the stairs clear? Are these stairs in front of me? Am I in the right location? All that stuff, we want it to work together seamlessly. It's just a tool. It's just helping somebody. So I think this is where maybe a combination of LiDAR, which has certain uses, and there are a whole bunch of downsides to LiDAR too, and also computer vision need to be integrated, but they need to work in a different way. And this I won't get into too much because my contrarian thinking has led me to thinking of the how you process this data in a different way.
Mhm.
But also, I don't think it's going to work in such a way where you're going to have you can rely on having all the data you could possibly want. So you know precisely in advance that, hey, this is exactly the way that this, like the front door of this building looks. That could get painted. So Google drives down streets, they take pictures of everything. They're starting to use this for some pedestrian navigation as you get closer to places, but it still isn't accurate. And, you know, the pictures are years out of date. Same thing as the beacons. Is if you have to take new pictures every single day in order to keep up with, it's not going to happen. So there's a problem there. So how do you develop technology that is smart in a different way? It can make certain judgment calls and hopefully not rely too much on machine learning. Is there some other way? And I think the answer is yes, but we want to break down the problem also like this: is we do not need to navigate and tell somebody, okay, move your right foot forward, move your left foot forward. Now do this. Now, you know,
you're right. You're
the person is still the smartest brain, the smartest device, if you will, of everything. Right. So we just need to provide the right information and just enough.
Just enough. Yes.
Just enough. Just like a cane. We want it to be kind of in the background, sort of transparent.
Right.
So I do think there's a way to do that. And in a way that's efficient and a way that I think will work with technology in the coming years. But I won't claim that it's going to happen until I can prove that it does actually work.
Okay, but I'm glad that you're able to be honest about it. You know, we get excited. It's normal. It's human. Mm-hmm. But we gotta be also aware of certain things. And sometimes companies claim, you know, blah 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 blah, and that's wonderful. But sometimes it may be realistic. Sometimes it may not be realistic, and we have to be aware and be a little bit cautious about certain things as well. And just not think that because a new technology is new and is helping in a certain field is going to be everything for us. So we got to be careful in that. So I like, Gary, that honesty. Okay, so getting into indoor navigation, what are you working on?
So with indoor navigation, and this was from the very beginning of the company, this has been something that development has been headed towards. So what we're working on is, for example, it's one thing to say, hey, we've made touchscreens accessible. Let's say you're in a new place, or let's say you're just in a big place.
Right.
Where is that touchscreen? How do you find it in the first place?
Good point.
You know, so it's a problem right next to the problem we're working on now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something I've done development on earlier. But I think there's the need for a long, slow buildup to make sure we have the right technologies, and perhaps even more importantly, we have the right user experience before we say, hey, you know, we want you to wear all this stuff, and we're now going to, you know, teach you, it's going to give you these instructions. And instead of working like, say, a very patient and very skilled O&M instructor, it's going to act like a 10-year-old kid and just tell you a bunch of things you don't even want to know. So, so where we're going with indoor navigation is, taken earlier stages, we want to be able to provide waypoints to somebody. It's like, okay, you're going to a new place. We don't want to necessarily tell you, again, walk 50 feet, 40 feet, 30 feet. Who wants to hear this? But what if we could just say, oh, you want to go here? You tell it what your destination is. We do want to use voice command for something like this when it's appropriate. Some people might want to enter it on their phone, but somehow or another, you enter the information, say, for instance, I want to go to room 314 in this building. And it starts off just by saying, walk ahead to, you know, these doors. And it gives you some estimate, however you want it, feet, meters, steps, time to get to that destination. And if you're fine, if you get to, let's say, the hallway, it doesn't need to tell you anything else. And thinking in terms of just waypoints. If we can just report the waypoint someone wants to hear, like, okay, you reach the end of a T intersection. Someone may or may not know right away they've reached a T intersection. And so in that case, we would say, turn right, turn left. And the idea is if we break it down like this, think if we could just identify waypoints while someone's walking, again, without a cell signal and without a Wi-Fi signal, without beacons. So none of that is available. Assume none of that's available because that's when we want it to work.
Yes, I agree with you. With you.
Wouldn't that be nice? And there's some other caveats, which I'll throw out another time, but things like, hey, what if it's kind of dark? Okay, all of a sudden a bunch of systems don't work. How do we allow for that? But if we can just tell somebody waypoints, then for a lot of people, that may be as much navigation as they need. They may just need like, oh, hey, there are double doors ahead. You're going to go straight through those and continue straight. So it's like if someone's walking sighted guide with a friend, that may be all they're saying. It's like, hey, we're coming up to some double doors. And then you keep talking and you do your thing. And then at some point, the sighted guide may just say, oh, hey, we're going to turn left here. Because maybe, the other person's, trying to develop some kind of mental map. So that's what we're looking at is what is the minimal amount of navigation that we can feed to build someone's mental map.
Interesting. That's another approach. That's interesting.
Yeah. And so now when we start thinking about this, we start thinking about it differently. So if we were to take the example of LiDAR, I'm not going to reveal anything that people haven't thought of before. So with LiDAR, so this is, and that's an umbrella term for whatever, a bunch of different 3D or distance sensing technologies. And I've worked with a bunch, and they all have their problems, which is another whole discussion. But there are all sorts of ways that they fail miserably. But if all we need to do is say, hey, we want to say, is there a T intersection coming up? Is there something like a door or a doorway coming up that's narrower? Will my wheelchair go through it? Now we're faced with a much simpler problem than solve indoor navigation as a whole. We're faced with how do we detect where there are waypoints that would be interesting that normally someone would talk about is like, okay, then you reach an intersection, then you go through this door, then you go this far. This is a much smaller problem. And what I'll mention, but I won't dive into is, okay, so what if we can detect these things? How far do we really need to know in advance that, oh, someone's going to turn? Or how do we get to room 314? And let's say it's in a building that doesn't have beacons, that no one else with this technology has been there before. We haven't gone in and scanned it. That gets to pretty, complicated stuff. But I think at the very, very beginning, even just being able to say, hey, we can detect where there are intersections and when there are doorways, and maybe even just in advance, so we can tell somebody it's like, you're going to do this. You're going to go through an intersection, and then you're going to turn left at the next intersection. Then you can go through some doors, and then room 14 is down about 30 feet on the right.
Oh, okay, Gary, but I have a question.
Sure.
In order to accomplish that, to make that happen, you need to map the building, right? Because if not, how can you say go to room 450 if you don't know where 450 is because you haven't mapped the area? How do you know?
Well, let me ask you this. So if you're on the ground floor of a building, and let's say you pass room 150, then where, for most buildings, not all, but where for most buildings would most people guess room 450 is?
Okay, it's gotta go up, I guess, right?
Yeah. So it's probably, not necessarily, but probably 3 floors straight up. And then,
4 floors. Yes.
So same relative place. And here's where I think it's instead of thinking of technology, we think about the way sighted people navigate. Is they, assuming they try this at all, will make the same assumption. And that may be the best that we do for a lot of these things is we want to present information such that, hey, if a sighted person has a reasonable chance of finding the place by checking, oh, I've passed these room numbers, this is part of the answer. And it's probably if I just pass room 150 and it's in the corner of the building, room 450 is probably also in the corner of the building. This is what a sighted person will do if they're thinking about it that hard, assuming they don't just ask somebody.
Yeah.
But, can we reduce it to a few simple rules that will work, 50% of the time, 60% of the time. And then the rest, we have to do things like, which others have started to do, look for room numbers and keep track of, the room numbers are going up. I'm at room 400, now 410, 415. I'm going in the right direction.
Yeah, then it's easy.
Yeah. Or there's a sign, arrows pointing this way to, these room numbers. Okay, now we're talking arrows and stuff, but we get back to now we're reading text. So,
you are touching, I think, two interesting subjects. One is also make the person think a little bit.
Yes.
And I think that is good too.
Yeah.
Because sometimes for our listeners, we think everything has to be, discussed or has to be said to us all the way. And that's great, but sometimes it's not so great. We get used to not thinking too much with certain types of technology.
Yes.
And we should also use our common sense, assume certain things, and use our head a little bit. I think it's fascinating what you are saying. It's the first time I hear it. Well, and it makes sense to me,
It's important.
It is important. Yes.
It really is. One of my advisors, who's been using assistive technology for many decades, used some sonar-based technology where it took a lot of training. So it wasn't just there's something there, but it would make different sounds depending on how far away it is. And you would start to develop the sense of, I can actually interpret this. So long period of training, and then you start to get a sense. And he said it was so cool. You could notice like the swing on a swing set. He knew it was the swing set in the backyard for his kids. But he started to get the sense that he was losing some of his other skills, maybe just a bit, but he was starting to be too dependent on it.
Yes.
And so
yes, you're right about that.
That's a problem.
That's a problem. That's a big one.
Especially since we can't make these technologies as smart as people. I don't think we're going to see that in our lifetime. Nothing like it. So we think of how simple can we make it to give someone the information they need, and how do we always think of it? It's not I use the word solution, but what I really should be saying, and I try to say as much as time, it's just one more tool. It's like you got a phone, you've got a dog, you've got a cane. They're just tools to help the person. I'm not helping the person. I'm making them a tool that they learn to use, hopefully without much effort. And then it's just kind of one more thing. It might as well be a screwdriver or a can opener. It just fades in the background, and that's all that it should be.
Right. Wow, I'm very impressed, and I think our listeners must be too. Because I was not expecting so much. I was expecting a lot, but not so much. So something else is, I was asked from a person from Spain to participate in some kind of a survey about how to make hotels more accessible in Europe.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of virtual meetings with this guy, and I was telling him what would be nice to make happen and everything. And he was saying, we are implementing these technologies in Europe. Yeah. But my thought to that, Gary, besides, needing to think more about what you're doing and not depending so much on technology, is that how are you going to map thousands of hotels all over the world? And you plan a trip and you have to download a map of an existing hotel, but there are thousands of hotels with different layouts and things. And and sometimes one room is not going to be working. So you get to that room, you open the room, and there is a couple there. And you say, oops, sorry. And things like that. And he said, but we'll eventually get there in a few years. We'll map everything. And, and, and,
Yeah, yeah.
and, and I said, and when it comes to concert venues, and he said, we're going to do the same. Everything is going to be mapped. But when I talk to you, Gary, I realize that we shouldn't see the world as such.
Yeah.
We have to find other approach to certain things.
Yes.
That's my view. But I know this is a long subject, but before I let you go, I'm getting more excited about all you're doing, and you have to keep us, updated about all of that, all those
Sure.
technologies, etc. When it comes to the indoor navigation,
Yeah.
what is coming? When do you think something like this could be a possibility? Understanding is not going to give us everything in information, but certain points of interest, if you wish, and it's going to help us a lot. How many years away are from this technology?
It depends on a couple things. For my company, it depends on basically being able to fund the engineering.
Good point.
By proving that, by basically, making touchscreen accessibility available, and whether it's free or whether we're charging for it, whatever, we need to make clear is like, hey, we're solving a problem that's worth solving and not just one we think is worth solving. So that's one thing, is once we do that and we've made it clear, hey, we've made a good start on this problem, then I think people are going to be more willing to believe that a problem as that's more general, like indoor navigation, is solvable. And maybe that we have something to say there. Maybe we've got an approach that's worth considering. And that, for instance, we're not even proposing to map all these different places in the world. They're probably, take Spain. There are buildings that have been there for, I'm sure, hundreds of years.
Right.
And the only map that exists at all is something someone hand drew, a long time ago. So
right.
I'm not expecting someone to walk around with 3D sensors and map. I just, it's, why depend on that? So if we start by thinking, let's just assume that's never going to happen, ever. How would it have to work for that to be true? And at this point, most people just throw out their hands and say, well, no, it has to be. It's like, well, okay, this is where real R&D is. You really got to think, okay, the technology actually, I think, is there. And we have to be clever about it. It's not just that if 90% of everyone who's written about this subject is working on it a certain way, which instantly after 2 years, they often ignore it and then work on something else.
Right.
But if just because most people think, ooh, the way to solve this problem is get lots and lots of data, just by having more data, all of our problems are solved. It's like,
right.
Well, no, even if you continue that path, it's still very hard. But what if that's not the approach to begin with? What if there is some other approach? And I just want to say this more generally, is that a lot of the ways that people think of solving these problems are as if they're somehow extensions of human vision, especially sighted engineers, right? Everything, what to them, and I'm saying this, I do not think this, but I'm just going to say it speaking.
Yeah.
From what I've heard and what I've read online too, is to a sighted engineer, what blind people really want is sight that works in exactly the same way and is understood in the same way as that sighted engineer. And having had conversations with some people, there might be people out there who think like that, but a lot of it is like, no, they want to do something. It's not, I want sight, is I want to be able to do these things. And I've had some people who are totally blind say, this is my life. I just want another tool. So when we think of it that way, we're not reproducing human vision because I don't think that's the right approach. And all of a sudden, like a whole bunch of these solutions make less sense. What if we think of it in terms of, and the LiDAR, the 3D scanning is a slightly different way. But what if we think, well, what if we essentially used a kind of sense that even people don't have? And I'm, some people say, oh, sonar. It's like, okay, people have done that for decades. We already know the limitations there, but there are other technologies that we can use. and I'll step back from the indoor navigation. It's a big problem. And I can't even really dive into what I think the right solution is to not having to map and not having to do this and not having to do that, because it's not like it's so simple anyone else could just run away with this idea, but it's a long conversation, and B, it is so counterintuitive most people wouldn't believe it. But I want to step back a bit, and I want to come up with a different sort of example, which will be familiar to a lot of people. Is when there was talk of making a writing system. We're talking, now is it 150 plus years ago?
Yeah.
Writing system for people who are blind. One of the starts was, hey, I'm going to carve letters in this block and you're going to be able to feel the raised letters. Hey, that's a great idea. And here, I'm going to carve these letters just like the letters are shaped, right? And you learn to interpret these letters. You know exactly where this is going. And then long after, Louis Braille came along and said, well, if the whole point is to get someone to read, I'm not saying he said this, but let's interpret a little bit. If it's going to be a tactile system, make it a tactile system that makes sense as a tactile system. Ta-da, Braille. Just when we think about Braille's technology, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing technology. It doesn't have to be a certain color because who cares? Right. We do want to establish standards. It's just different. It's a writing system and so on. So, but for decades after that, even then there was, there's the Moon script and there are all these other scripts that people are arguing for. And some people even still, Helen Keller herself knew something like 6 different systems. But all those pretty much went away, and we're left with Braille, which I think by any objective standard is the better system. So we really need to think of new technologies in that way. It's like, are we solving the problem because this is the exciting way for engineers to do it, or this is the way sighted engineers think it should be solved? Or are we thinking of what is going to be most useful to someone? Are we thinking of something that we're still relying on their brain to do most of the work? And are we doing it in a way that's cheap? Are we doing it in a way that's accessible from the very beginning? And you start thinking like that, and entirely different solutions present themselves. It may take years, but the solutions are very, very different. And I do think one way of thinking about this is like, what if we just throw this whole notion of vision out the door for a moment and think, what are some other ways of sensing the world that we can then interpret in a simple way and present that to somebody? So they know, oh, hey, the door that I want is not only right ahead of me, 10 feet in front of me, but it's the one on the right, not the one on the left.
Gary,
different way of thinking.
Yes, it's a fascinating subject. And my final question is a very powerful one. It is not a question, it's me envisioning the world with smart glasses and millions of technologies attached to them. And when do you think something like that can happen? Understanding something that critical that you said in a way, and is that we don't need all the information all the time, or we could become crazy. We need certain information in different ways sometimes. Vibration, speaking to us, etc. Okay. What do I envision? And people have asked me that here in Colombia because they know I do interviews internationally and all of that. Okay, I envision my smart glasses having millions of technologies, literally. So we are able to walk in the streets and I hear something saying to me, to your right, McDonald's, to your left, a bank.
Yes.
In front of you in 10 meters, it's an obstacle, a moving obstacle, or maybe a static one. 20 feet to your left is a lady, 20 feet to your right is a cat.
Yeah.
I keep walking and it says 30 meters away, you have a pizza place.
Right.
And I go into the subway and it tells me, to your left, you have line number 1 that is going to Brooklyn. 20 meters away to your right, you have the line 2 that goes to Bronx. You go those 20 feet and then it says, the train number 2 is coming to your right. Doors are opening.
Right.
You start walking, it says, you can see it right now.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
So am I dreaming too much? Maybe I'm dreaming too much.
No, let me ask you this one question that I think will take some of the tech pressure off. That is, instead
okay.
of no, but I mean pressure on the time or the resources it would take to develop all of those and have them work together. Is
Okay.
if there is some way we could basically have a tool that works at all those points. You know, I'm passing McDonald's. There's a woman in front of me. There's an obstacle that's relevant. Okay, now I'm going the subway, and these are the trains I want to know about. Which way do I go to get to the platform? What if you were going somewhere unfamiliar, but you could plan that trip in advance and essentially have that experience before you even go there?
Yeah.
Do you think that might require less technology once you make the actual trip, because you'll already be familiar with some of the, let's say, fixed things that are out there, like the McDonald's, and the fact that when you get to the platform, you know, there are certain directions, right? So if you're going, if you know you're going to train 1, that's off to the left. You're going to train 4, maybe that's off to the right. So if you could practice that in advance, let's say from home or from wherever you're staying, or sit on a bench and experience it, do you think that would be useful enough that then you wouldn't necessarily need as much information?
Of course. In my case, yes, the only problem is some people have some very important memory issues.
Yes.
So my comment to that would be, okay, maybe it's not real time, as I was saying, but
Sure.
there is a kind of how to say that, like an information guide, or I'm not sure, something that tells you, okay, if you forgot that,
right,
from living that experience at home, remember that when you go to subway, to the left 20 meters away is going to be the train number 1. I don't know, something, because people may end up losing that thought and saying, oh my God, now I don't remember. Where should I go? You know?
Or, you know, if someone, so a lot of reasons someone could have cognitive impairments, which could be temporary as well.
Yeah.
You know, think of a joyful example. Let's say for someone who drinks, they go out and they've been having a great time meeting friends, and then they're a little bit impaired. They still, you know, they're walking, but they're getting turned around a little bit.
Yes.
Or maybe, you know, maybe they, this is someone with early stage dementias. They just get forgetful, or maybe they have ADHD and they start thinking about someone else and they lose their way for other reasons, or any number of things. Maybe they're with a friend. They say, hey, I know the way. And then the friends are talking. I have lost 2 of my blind friends and myself doing this very thing. We're talking. And then I suddenly realize, we have to go back. So
yeah.
So cognitive support is also something that I think we can expect from our technology. And I there are people who are working on that. Again, I think this is a place for joint ventures or cooperation. But if we can say before we go somewhere, this is my goal, this is what I want to do. I want to go to, let's say I'm in Brooklyn and I want to go to the Bronx, or I'm outside the mall, and I might just kind of wander around, but what I really want to do is I want to get a shirt, and I'd like to know if there are any sales. Like, I don't want to spend too much. So if we can state the goals in advance in a way such that, in the same sort of way, like you could type it into Google or into Apple Maps or something, that kind of thing, like a few words, then we have the option of, let's say, creating a route, just like a mapping app does, or essentially saving a note, say, hey, remember, this is what you're doing.
Creating a route.
Yeah, creating a route. And then we can consider, let's say someone normally travels and it's giving very little information. Maybe they're sort of familiar with the route. And so they just need to know, like I was saying before, about waypoints. Maybe that's enough in most cases for most people.
Yeah.
But it could be for everybody at some point, you need a little more help. And then you say, okay, now I want a little more guidance. Now I'm going to stop. I'm going to maybe turn left, turn right. And I just want to get all this information. And so right now I want to be oriented.
Yes.
And now I can make a decision that, oh, now I remember, or I've now heard the things that I heard maybe the first time I came here, the second time I came here, is like, here's this train, here's that train. And not only am I oriented now, but, and, you know, I could go on my regular route, but hey, maybe I changed my mind because now you've got the information you need. You can change your goal, but it's setting a goal, being able to break it down into a few pieces. I want to go from here to here. I'd like to do that without running into something. Like maybe there's a barrier that wasn't there last week.
Right.
And maybe I'm busy. Maybe I'm talking on the phone. Maybe I'm listening to music. I just like to be notified in a non-annoying way that something's coming up that wasn't there before, that I should be aware of.
Right.
And I need to be notified. And that's another thing about, I used cognitive impairment, but really is, do we have the focus on what we're doing? And is that sufficient focus? So someone could have no cognitive impairment whatsoever, but if there's something that's changed in front of them, they need to be informed of that. And that's another example where, say, like just knowing beacon or having beacons and knowing maps and stuff, it's enough. You'd really like to have a couple different things. Like you're saying, you have a million technologies. I don't think we need that many, but you have a few different technologies running.
Right.
And I certainly don't have a simple answer for this, but we need to be able to have those technologies switching on and off as we need them. Like, I need more information right now.
Totally agree. And I was thinking, okay, I'm going into the subway and I say to the virtual assistant, so to speak, Siri or whatever, I say, give me more information.
Yes.
Now, give me less. Now, don't talk. Things like that. Oh, this is fascinating. But Gary, you will not like my next question. My last question is, when?
I'll go back to my earlier answer is it depends.
Okay.
So no, let me be more, but I'll be more specific. No, I think in 10 years,
okay, I'm liking that answer.
So I think within a reasonable frame, we're going to have some of these technologies that you talked about. I think, you know, OCR is going to be even more capable than it is now.
Right.
And we're going to have OCR that explains things a little bit in context. So not just it sees a word, but, oh, this is a word in a book. This is part of a map.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so some context, not science fiction, but more than we have now. I think if my company succeeds in at least some of its plans for indoor navigation, then some of these things like detecting an unexpected obstacle or knowing when to turn, that hopefully within 5 years.
Wow.
And then the one thing I'll say is just, we look at the past 10 years, what's happened that we didn't expect at all, like no one expected.
No.
And it wasn't that long ago that this supercomputer that is also a camera, that is also all these other things, basically our entire computer is it's in our pocket and it does all these things.
You're absolutely right.
I don't remember anyone really expecting that. So
no, impossible.
So maybe 50% of what's happening related to all these things you mentioned, it could be there's something else no one is expecting. I would love to take part in some of that. I've had some weird ideas, but it gets back to do people really want it? And for example, this is the last thing I'll mention is when we look at a technology, say, hey, how well does this navigation thing work? Is like, okay, imagine this. Pick a city where you don't know the language. And imagine you're there and it's dark and it's raining and you're outside and you need to go to the bathroom. Does the technology help me there? So next time someone says, we're working on this technology, say, okay, I'm in Beijing or I'm in Oslo. It's raining and it's dark and I need to go to the bathroom. Can your technology help me with that? And if they say, no, you say, I think you've got more work to do. So
Gary.
Yeah.
Okay, one last question.
Yes.
If I have my smart glasses on and I walk into a McDonald's restaurant that has those big menus,
Yes.
um, how do they call those menus that you see in front of you that are huge with all the um, combos that they have available?
Right. The big touchscreen menus. Yeah.
No, not touch screen.
They call them something else.
Those.
The kiosk-y sort of menus.
No. Do you see them hanging in there? Like they are in front of you, but you are not able to touch it or anything. So how do you?
I know what you're talking about. So it's I don't even think there's a word in English for it that I know of, anyways. But it's just the general problem of there's a menu, and let's say it's behind the counter.
Yes, that one.
That sort of thing. Yeah, and that's there's the menu, and they point, and it's like, wow, that's helpful. You're pointing at a thing that I can't read either. So
yeah, being able using my smart glasses to get to those kind of places.
Yeah.
And be able to say, okay, they have this, okay.
Right.
And then you decide what to eat because you're able to understand what it says there. And another example, I go to the movies.
Right.
There is a movie and I want to make it audio described. So maybe I download an application on my smart glasses and I'm watching the movie with audio description.
Yeah.
We are very far away from that, you think?
I think we'll take those two examples. The movie one, yes, I think that's very far away.
Okay.
And I think you might get basic descriptions that are accurate. That it might say how many people are there. Maybe it can track or recognize some people sometimes, not if they're facing away, all these sorts of things. But I think it's going to be very basic for a long time. Netflix audio description for at least English language movies that I've heard is good. But there are engineers, there are people there who are just generating this. And they, they're even asking, how do we improve this? They go on Reddit and ask, how do we improve this? Is there something lacking? And they're trying really hard, but that's a person. You almost think of it as like it's another writer. They're looking at something and they're essentially retelling the story in a way that makes sense. It's not just like a script, but they're really telling the story in a way that makes sense. Not too many details, like we're talking about before, enough details that someone is enjoying the movie in the same way.
Right.
So given that it requires a person to do this now, I think that's a long ways off.
Okay.
But much closer is being able to read restaurant menus that you can't touch and you can't hold out your hand and kind of point at something. Because I think that here we're talking about technologies that maybe they haven't been brought together and maybe they're not quite mature enough, but they're much closer. And so a restaurant menu has usually, if it's not handwritten, which in a lot of countries they will be, but go to a small restaurant, handwritten menu on the wall. But if it's a McDonald's like thing and it's up high and it's behind the counter, then this is sort of like document interpretation or document recognition, which there are technologies that will handle that reasonably well.
Yes.
And what we look for there is the same way that at least like when I've had friends ask me, it's like, can you tell me what's on the menu? So tell me the categories first. And then for each category, tell me what's in there. I may ask you to stop and then read the description. So we start at a very high level. Basically, what does this restaurant have? Entrees, salads, drinks. Okay, I want to hear about the drinks. Maybe I'm just thirsty. Okay, then we hear more about that. Now I'm interested in this drink. I could get a coffee or I could get a Pepsi or something. Okay, tell me how much they cost. Coffee is 60 cents. Pepsi is $1.79. Great, I'll take a coffee. So we really just needed to know the categories. We need to recognize there's a menu there. We need to know the categories. And then, within the categories, we need to read as well. But I think this is closer. And if there was enough interest in it, and if I had the resources, this is something that I would work on because I've been in this very situation. I am reading a menu to somebody, and that's the way we did it. We broke it down by categories, and then we went through the items. And somehow you got to remember, I like this, but I also want to hear about that. But it's an interesting problem. But I do think it's doable, and that's much closer.
And Gary, let me go further than that. Let's say we are walking into the airport and there are those big screens there
Yes.
where it says Washington door number 3. Will you be able to see those, to read those kind of big monitors information?
Airports and train stations, I think, are a somewhat special case in that
Okay.
the reason is that we do know there's some consistency from country to country.
Yeah.
It's a very specific situation. And this is a case where maybe not even beacon, even just the notion that, hey, I'm in an airport, all of a sudden we say, we need to recognize those big, whatever you call them, destination boards, those monitors.
Yes.
They're typically going to be in certain places. They're going to be, and we might even know, this is an example where mapping something out and having some more information in advance. This is doable because we're not talking about thousands of buildings, even one town.
You're right.
But
You're right.
1 or 2 airports, some train stations, these sorts of things. I do think this is a case where beacons may be a good solution for a while, or some other accessible technologies may be implemented. It may be different from place to place, which I don't like that idea. I think someone should take accessibility with them, and wherever they go, it's a consistent experience.
Right.
But in that case, yes, if we know that, hey, we're looking for this thing we can describe. It's a bunch of words with place names of cities in these different languages.
Yes.
And next to those names are going to be times that are arranged a certain way, which is relatively consistent in my experience from one country to the next.
Yes.
Then, yeah, I think this is doable. That is really a matter of time and money more than anything. I think the technology it's probably good enough today. And if someone committed to doing this and doing it in a way that was simple and affordable, and they weren't trying to solve every problem in the world at the same time, then I think this is very doable.
Okay, I also have another question. I need to ask this one.
Sure.
When you go to Times Square and you see the Jumbotronic, that kind of big screen with a lot of advertisement,
yeah,
do you think it will be able to recognize, Coke, sign, blah, 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 things like that?
Yeah, it's just a matter of the number of different things. I don't want to make it sound simple, but there are so many different things that could be on that big Jumbotron thing. Like, we would probably know, oh, hey, you're in Times Square. What's there? This big screen. It's right now, detection is pretty good to say, for some artificial intelligence thing to say, oh, hey, I see a thing that looks like a screen. It could be a laptop screen. It could be a TV screen. It could be a movie screen. But screen things they're rectangular. They have a certain look about them, and so on. So actually, recognition of those is fairly good. It's better than terrible. And then from there, it's like, you want to recognize what's on the screen. Well, you can recognize certain things probably. And if you knew what sort of things are likely to be on whatever screen this is, the Jumbotron in Times Square, which can be changing all the time, then yeah, you'd have some chance of recognizing. But it gets to those problems is, are we trying to find something specific that we know about in advance? Or are we trying to have some generalized capability that'll recognize just about anything, just about anywhere? Those problems are always harder. The more specific you can be and the more you know in advance, obviously the better. So knowing there's a screen there, yes. And once we know there's a screen there and we're pointed in the right direction, could we read the text on that screen? Probably most of it. Could we recognize a logo that's as widely known as the Coca-Cola logo? Yeah, that's probably one of the first ones you do. Coca-Cola, McDonald's, a few others, for talking about American-based companies. And then when you get beyond that, how much can you generalize it? Yeah, then it gets hard. But
okay.
I think some of it's possible.
Okay, I have 2 last questions.
Sure.
Sorry, it's just a very exciting.
No, please.
Show. One is there any organization trying to put together all these technologies in terms of making alliances possible? Because one thing that I don't understand, Gary,
yeah,
is that you have I don't know, so many companies trying to help us in GPS technology.
Right.
Instead of working together, they work on their own.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be wonderful to have an organization that puts everything together and they say, okay, do you want to help these people? Work together. You'll make money. You'll make money.
Yes. Yes.
But nobody's doing this, Gary, worldwide.
I do have an answer to this. I'm just trying to make it a not very long answer, because this is something I have proposed. I have talked to some
Oh, you have?
companies. Yes, I have, under non-disclosure, so I can't mention who they are, what companies they are. In the United States, people would recognize a couple of names, and I'm not saying,
Okay,
because it's
okay.
great, but it's like, it's a known problem. And one of the problems is just that there are these different technologies that companies develop. When it comes to, as soon as we start talking about assistive technologies or technologies specifically developed for the blind and visually impaired community, now we're talking typically much smaller companies, far fewer companies. And there was a discussion, I missed it because of the timing of a flight. How can we bring people together? It's this very question. How can we get all of us, all these different organizations together to solve this problem? And I
Right.
had an answer to this question. I couldn't make it to the meeting on time. And my answer is, we have to develop technology that ties these things together. We need the piece that goes in the middle to make sure that someone says, okay, I'm developing GPS, to take an example, or let me think of a one that's more specific. I'm developing something that recognizes touch screens.
Right.
And that's just as an example. I know there's this other company that has the actual touchscreen accessibility part, the Echobatix. They do that. That's their thing. But I'm developing something just to recognize, hey, there's a touch screen here. I don't want to do anything else. I want to focus on that. How do we work together? Well, the answer is usually, let's have a meeting. Let's get our engineers talking. We're going to develop this one way to develop one product together.
Right.
And that's something. But wouldn't it be nice if there was some standard we could develop to say,
that would be wonderful.
I've got something that recognizes objects, and someone says, hey, I could use that with my technology. Or there are 3 or 4 or 5 or 12 of these companies, each with their own specialty. And then there's another company that says, our entire purpose is to combine these pieces. And I think this is really important. This ability to combine pieces never goes away. You don't have to pay for it. And it just continues and continues, just like the way basically the web works in terms of how do web pages get displayed. All browsers display the same web page. That's a standard. How do they share information? There are standards. If we had this kind of information exchange standard for assistive technology,
yes,
I think the cost of that technology would come down faster, because now you do not have a bunch of companies saying, oh, we're going to develop an app.
Yes.
And what we're going to do is we're going to spend half of our money building the structure of this app and connecting to Siri. Like you heard the voice in my iPhone. I didn't develop that voice. I'm using Apple's voice with my app. So what if half of that development cost goes away because you can rely on some other piece out there for it?
Yeah.
So for example, the touchscreen accessibility piece that you want in your whatever, some other app.
Yeah.
So I have talked to companies specifically about this. I do think there's a technical approach. I've written up the technical approach in a semi-complete draft. But the reason I think this is doable, I'm not creating this out of thin air, but this is how other industries work. That if you want to build a car, or actually a better example, I think, and one that I have some experience in, is that if you want to build a computer and you want to get all the pieces, all the machines to build a computer, you go to one company for this $1 million piece of machinery, and you go to this company for another $1 million piece of machinery. And those two companies are required, if they want to sell anything to you, to make it so that their machines can connect and communicate using a standard. Auto industry is like that. Several industries are like that. Assistive technology is not like that. For the new technologies, there are standards for documents. There are standards for like BRF files and stuff for Braille, but there are not standards for saying, I'm going to pass, object recognition results. Like, I'm pretty sure that's a person in front of you. Okay, how do I get those results into my navigation app? How do I know that, oh, hey, this is the person I was looking for? Hey, look, it's Louise. Here he is.
Right.
These are all different pieces. We'd really like those pieces to come together. And what it means is there needs to be a standard. And that is coming. I'm going to develop that standard as part of the few pieces I want to work on. And then I've got a way to demonstrate it. It's like, look, I, in my company, put together touchscreen accessibility. And we put together an indoor navigation solution and maybe something in between. We developed these few pieces, which could be separate, but we made it so they can talk to each other as if they were developed by different companies. Hey, look, this is possible. Would you like to add your technology to this? We would like that. We think a lot of people would like that. And then maybe we can bring the cost of this technology down, because not every company making something for very specific use has to develop everything from the ground up.
Yes, and my point, Gary, and for our listeners, is that I see dozens of applications doing very similar things for blind people, and I say, I don't understand it. Why you don't talk to each other, make this faster for us, better for you, more productive, low cost, etc. So it has to happen. When is going to happen, Gary?
I hope within 3 years there's a standard.
Oh, wow, really?
Yes, I'm not saying everyone would adopt it, but I started working on the standard. And it's like the internet standard. It's very engineering-y. Not everyone would care. They just want to know, is it there? Is there a reason that company X isn't using it? And then they can call company X. It's like, hey, how come you're not doing this? But yes, so I think even creating a demonstration, we start with something simple. Let's just demonstrate two things working together that didn't before. Okay, how do we do that? Then we can go around and we can talk to the other companies. We can talk to users. We can talk to basically everybody we possibly can to get feedback, to make sure it's headed in the right direction. And then we say, this is one of the missing pieces for this industry. We really need this. Let's start joining together. And like I said, there has been some interest, but even companies who know that something like this is lacking or would be useful,
yes,
they're also, holding off a bit to say, hey,
I bet.
Yeah, So, but I need it for my work. So as long as we're developing a couple different technologies, we're going to need this. And then we have a means of demonstrating it. And that's where I think that's the beginning of this snowball.
So Gary, if I understand correctly for our listeners,
yes,
you mean in a few years, if I see 15 GPS applications doing similar things, I could send an email to all of them saying, look, you could use the standard that your industry applies for, and you could be helping each other, making this one powerful tool where everybody uses their talents to make it happen faster, better, and with low cost, right?
Yes. There is even something kind of like this now, where if you have a couple different apps, they have to be specific apps. They have to, and those apps can send data into, like, use the internet to send data into the cloud. And if they can receive data from outside, because apps usually can't talk to each other on the same phone for security reasons. But if they can send data, there is an app. I haven't used it for a while. I believe it's still out there. And it's called I think it's IFTTT. If this, then that. And so, for example, if I walk within 100 feet of this building, then, I don't know, send a message to my friend, but do it automatically. And what it does is let's say it uses GPS and it says, oh, you've gotten close to this point that you saved before. And when that happens, oh, we now know it's time to send a text message. And then it has some stuff that magic goes on the background. So it can connect these two separate features. And there are other apps that will interact with if this, then that, IFTTT. So you can start creating these little pieces of logic. Like when I do this, I want you to do that. When this happens, I want this other thing to happen. So imagine that same thing running, but it's geared very specifically for assistive tech, and it's providing information in a way that's meaningful to the people who use it. So it's not so generalized that, you know, it's like a sighted person giving directions to a white cane user. And you're like, okay, yeah, pointing is not helping me. Don't point, describe, you know, how I get there, or draw a map on my hand or whatever. It's like, you know, we know some of that. We've talked about many of these technologies. We've got GPS. We have, hey, where's the door? We've got touchscreen accessibility. We have recognizing, is there an obstacle in my way? So we can recognize that, hey, there are a few things that people would like to fill in the gaps of the technology we already have. How do we get those pieces to talk together? And let's make it just open enough as a standard that some other pieces can come on over time. But, and I do want to make this other point, is that let's say someone develops something really cool, really cool technology. And then after 5 years, that one company that makes this cool technology gets bought up and the technology dies. That's happened many times.
Yes.
Including assistive tech. And okay, now we've got nothing. But if there's a standard, and if that standard allowed for this technology that said, hey, there's a special kind of, I don't know, a thing that recognizes a car when it's approaching the crosswalk. And that's all the technology does. And that company goes away. But there's all of a sudden, there's a standard that says, hey, we've got essentially this hole where there used to be this technology. And what that technology that is now gone was communicating to all the other technologies was all the sorts of things that you would need to know, like, here's the car, it's approaching from this direction. So you need this information. Here's how fast. Here are the words you use to inform somebody of that. All these different pieces, someone has actually figured out how whatever this technology is communicates with the user and what information is important. Another company can take that same information and then develop technology knowing there's a use for it. They don't have to develop it from scratch. They just have to develop to that standard. A very real application, which some people may be aware of, is there was a device called the Opticon decades ago, which was a reader that could be used to read print, just ink print text. And so it's a camera reading ink print text, and it would raise these pins to represent, say, an ink print A. So if someone knows the shape of an ink print A, they could actually feel that shape. Getting back to our earlier conversation about, you know, Braille and stuff, they could feel that shape and know that's an A. And then some people got used to this device and they use it regularly, and then it was no longer produced. And there are still people, this is what I've heard secondhand, to this day using that, and they have to look for spare parts, and there's nothing else like it on the market at all. So, you know, converting an image into touch for this specific purpose. But if we knew how that worked, and if there was a standard, and if that Opticon plugged into your iPhone, let's say, and we knew all of the messages it would send to the iPhone, some other company might be able to come along and make something that's much cheaper. And there would be another Opticon again, might be called something else. But I want to make sure that people don't get expensive technology and then 3 years later it's worthless because the company went away, the technology is no longer supported, and now their $6,000 widget someday is it's just not going to work, and there's no way to fix it.
Right.
This is another reason for standards. We need a standard way of reporting object recognition. We need a standard way of allowing people who are deafblind to interface with technology that maybe wasn't made with them in mind, and so on and so on. Standard ways to provide information between technology. So then we have a standard way of giving that information to someone who could make use of it.
Yeah, and also, Gary, working together working
Yes.
together to make this a better world. I mean, it's not so hard to understand, I think. So it's very important what you're saying, Gary.
Yes.
Okay, my two last questions
Sure.
are no, don't get scared. No, no, this one is out of curiosity. What did you study?
Physics and German. So physics because it always interested me, and German because it interested me. I'm one of these people, I like to study different things. And,
Oh,
and so those two things just kind of ended up being what I spent the most time studying in college. So that's what I got degrees in.
I thought you were joking. Oh, you're
Nope.
serious.
I'm totally
Physics
serious.
and
I'm totally
German.
serious. Yeah.
Really?
And German. I studied for a year in Germany. And I'm interested in language. And I have a lot of books. I spend a lot of time reading. My wife spends a lot of time reading. Our child likes to read. We're big into reading in this family. So, as I get older, I get more and more focused on a few subjects at a time. But I'm really interested in what I like about the physics part is it makes you sit and think of things in a somewhat more abstract way, and in sometimes a more unusual way. Like stuff just something's not making sense. Why is that? It's like, let's throw away as many assumptions as we can, and then let's just think of the problem differently. And there's so many stories of physicists inventing things or coming up with ideas because they were drinking a beer, or they had read something years ago that really struck them, and then they use this something out of a story that helped them solve a problem of physics. It's just all these stories, but it happens again and again. And so this is one of the things I like about physics. I'm not a physicist. I'm really an engineer, inventor, whatever, business owner. But I still think in those terms. And then the language part really, helped me think, okay, German's not that much different from English, but this is a different culture. We talk about mostly the same things, but you go to Germany and you talk about slightly different things. And then, oh, hey, I'm meeting someone from China who speaks German, or someone from Italy or Spain or from Egypt, and we're all speaking German together, which is kind of weird for me to think. But, this notion of trying to completely change your perspective, that has helped too.
And Gary, I thought, because I know people who speaks German, and
Yeah.
I said to someone, maybe it's a little bit similar to English.
Yeah.
And they said, yeah, it has a similarity to it. Okay, Gary, it's been super powerful. The only thing I want to say is, okay, before I say goodbye,
Yes.
Do you have any final thoughts about all our conversation?
Yes. And I think it's important to summarize in terms of goals.
Yes,
and
goals. Yes.
and values even. And so my company has a goal, a way of thinking that shapes everything. And I've been calling it tech, as in technology, equity, similar to equality. So we don't have a mission statement. Like companies have mission statements, don't be evil, think better,
Right.
Whatever. We have a mission question. Questions can't always be answered. What's the meaning of life? Well, that's been going around for a while. So our mission question, it's focused, but anyways, I'll just say what it is. It's how do we achieve tech equity for blind and visually impaired people? That's the question. What if we have to change our business? What if someone else comes along and has this great solution for indoor navigation? Okay, we've got a question to answer. And I would love that question to be completely answered. Like, there's nothing left to achieve. I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime. But when we ask a question, it usually leads to more questions,
right,
leading to more solutions. If you have a statement, a mission statement, this is what we're doing. What happens if things change? What if that statement isn't quite right? And I don't mind the question not even being the best question. It just opens the door. So we're constantly asking this question are we answering this question? We're touchscreen accessibility. Are we really achieving tech equity? Okay, so what does equity mean? And by that I mean, it's not just accessibility, but equal outcomes. Everybody has the same outcome, the same, let's call it quality of experience using technology.
Mm-hmm.
And so if someone uses a microwave, it's not just that, okay, sighted people use the microwave because it's designed for them, and it's been made accessible, I'm putting that in quotes, because it's possible for someone who isn't sighted to use it. It may take them 10 times as long, but it's possible, therefore it's accessible, therefore our work is done. I don't like where that line of thinking can go, because some companies, I think, once they've made something quote unquote accessible, they may well think they're done. Not many companies, but accessible is important in many cases. It's not even there yet. We still have to make some things accessible, but what if we think in terms of, well, how do we measure if something's accessible enough? And I think the best measure is everybody has the same outcome. Everybody is equal when they use this technology. And so it's always a work in progress. You have a question you're always trying to answer, and you're trying to go to a goal, which is equality or tech equity. That is, we can actually measure it. Can Alvaro, can my friend who lives across town, can you both use a kiosk in the same amount of time as a sighted person? And can you accomplish the same thing? If we can answer those questions, boom, that's a problem that we've solved pretty well. Can we all find the bathroom in the mall? If we can all find the bathroom in the mall, then we're all equal in some way.
Right.
Maybe not in the most important way, but that one seems to, you're in a mall, you really got to go to the bathroom, you got to find it. That's a yes or no question. And all of a sudden it's like, we can actually define in specific instances, do we have equity? We can all do the same thing, and preferably in about the same amount of time, we have the same experience, and it's no more stressful for one person or the other. I think that's what civilization is about.
Mm-hmm. Gary, so how can people reach out to you?
Excellent question. So the company name is Echobatix. Yes, we have a website. So I'll spell it. E as in elephant, C as in cat, H as in Harry, O as in, oh boy, I couldn't think of it. ECHO as an echo, like an echo of your voice. And then B as in my last name, Bartos, or banana, A as in apple, T as in Thomas, BAT, like the animal bat. So we have echo as an echo that we hear, bat as in the animal, and then IX on the end. So I as in I am Gary, and X as in xylophone, or X marks the spot. So ECHOBATIX. Or you can search for me, Gary Bartos, GARY, last name B as in Bravo or banana, ARTOS, and you'll find the website, or you'll find me, and then we can follow up. So, and there's some information on the website. There's a link to a YouTube video that demonstrates the Point and Speak app. There's some other links, some information, not too much, but I think enough for people to find.
Enough.
And of course, if they want to contact you, then you can find me. We can do it that way too.
Yeah, I can say to our listeners, it was enough information to say this is exciting to have in our show, and as you can see, it's been very powerful.
Thank you so much,
Gary. What a great pleasure. I'm looking forward to the application, smart glasses, blah 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 blah. So many millions of things that are coming your way and our way.
Yes.
So thank you, Gary, again for your time and expertise.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and it's been an honor. I'm so happy that you invited me to this conversation. It's been great.
I say the same, and for our listeners, if you want to be on the show, remember you can email me at lowvisionbureau@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter, and please share this episode with your friends on Spotify, YouTube, and more platforms coming up. So this is Alvaro from LVB Show saying good night.